In this video I'm going to show you 5 stitches that will add some texture to your embroideries. So why would you want to add some texture to your embroideries? So unlike a painting, textiles are very tactile, so you want to touch them. So rather than just have them flat, you can add a little bit of texture in there and it will make them 3-dimensional and really lovely to touch as well. So I'm going to show you some stitches that will do just that. So I'm going to start with French knots. Now this for some reason seems to be a stitch that people either love or they hate. I'm not sure why. It's not a particularly difficult stitch, you just need to know a couple of things about it. So I'm going to work those in this shape here. I've just put a back stitch behind this, around this edge rather, so I've got a shape to work in. And I'm using 6 strands of cotton for this, so they become nice and textured so you can see what I'm doing, but you can use as many as you like. Obviously the fewer strands you use or the finer the thread, the smaller the knots will be. So I'm just going to bring my needle up where I want my knot to start, and I'm going to hold the thread down towards me. The needle goes above this, away from me, and all I'm going to do is wrap the thread over the needle and underneath it. Now this is one part that's important, is to keep that tension on it. The needle goes back into the fabric, not in the same hole, otherwise the knot will pull through to the back. So just close by, doesn't matter if it's above or to the side, but just close by to where you came out. And this is a really important bit about French knots, is just pull that tight around the needle. You can see I can actually let go of it there. You can hold it if you want to. Wiggle the needle through to the back and then just pull down slowly so you've got some control over it. And there's a French knot. So I'll do a couple more. So up where you want the knot to start, thread towards you, needle above the thread, wrap over the needle, wrap back. Needle goes into the fabric nearby to where you came out. Keep the tension on that thread. That's what will make your knots consistent, so that they all look the same. And I'm just going to group them together, because we can actually fill in. So we can either use them singly on their own, or you can put them together and you'll make quite a nice raised texture. You can wrap them twice if you want to. I prefer, if I want a bigger knot, to use a thicker thread. Wouldn't wrap them more than twice. It is a bit harder to pull the needle through. It'll give you a slightly bigger knot. So if you wanted the texture to vary, that's one way of doing it. If you're left-handed, it's the same, but the needle just goes that way round and the thread goes over the needle like so, but otherwise it's exactly the same. And I'm just going to fill this area in with these knots. Right, on the last 2, so let's finish this off. So on the last few, and I've been filling them in exactly the same way. I haven't changed the direction that I'm working them, so the knots all look like they're the same way round, but it does fill it in really neatly. And if you do single French knots, they give you nice little small dots of texture, but when you put them all together, they make this lovely raised piece of embroidery. So really nice on their own or in a whole group together. Squeeze that last one in there. I've used a variegated thread as well for just a little bit of extra interest. So just finish off that last one. Pack them in nice and tightly. You can just weave your thread through on the back to finish your thread. So that's a really nice group of French knots for texture. So the next stitch we're going to look at is one called Granitos, and these make little round circles of texture, so a little bit like the French knots, but a little bit flatter and round and slightly larger. And I'll show you what one of those looks like. So they're nice and easy. They're made of straight stitches, and that is the first stitch, and that's going to be the size of my Granito. So I'm going to come back up where I started. I'm coming through the same hole. And I'm going to go back down in the same hole. So it looks like I'm doing 2 stitches on top of each other. But what I'm going to do now is just hold that one with my finger and just guide it so that it sits to the left of my original stitch. I'm going to come back up where I started and do one to the other side. I'm using 6 strands again for this, so it makes a nice texture. So there's one to that side. Now there's no limits as to how many stitches you can put in. That's what 3 stitches looks like with 6 strands, but if you want to put some more in, you can keep going. So I'm going to put another one each side, so it's up and down the same hole each time, but try and get that so that your stitch, I'll just use my Malor and then you can see what I'm doing, sits to the side of the previous ones, and it makes this sort of little oval shape. So this is the 5th stitch, and that's one finished one. So we're going to do another one of those. I'll do it above. So straight stitch to start off, back up through the same hole, back down the same hole, but when you pull that one through, just try and lie it to one side or the other. It doesn't matter if you go left or right first, it doesn't make any difference. Now we're going to come back up through the same hole and back down through that hole, and this one will lie to the other side. So that's 3 stitches. I'm going to leave that one like that because it actually looks quite nice like that, and then I'll put one above it. So nice if you wanted to decorate something with this. You didn't necessarily want to fill it all in, but you want something that's a little bit larger than a French knot. Now what these do quite nicely is they lock together, so I'm going to put one on either side to show you how that works. So if you did want to sort of fill an area in a little bit more with these, you can. So I'm going to sort of offset that and go between that previous row. Not doing anything different with my stitch. The one side and to the other side, and then I'll come over here and do on this side. So if you wanted a smaller granito, I just recommend using a finer thread rather than making your stitch smaller. So I'll put a couple more in and you can see what they look like when they're grouped together. So I'm just going to do one more just so you can see the effect of them grouped together, almost like little berries. I believe the word is Spanish for grain, so I guess you can see where that would come from. So one more on this side. So really nice on their own, these stitches, or lovely as an effect together. Really, when I touch that, they're very textured, so something a little bit bigger than the French knot. So lovely on their own, lovely together, really simple stitch, and that's Granitos. So this is so named because it looks like the knots in a Turkish rug stitch. This is really textured. This is a lot of fun, this stitch. You can do lots with it, and it's one of the few stitches that starts from the top of the fabric and not from underneath with a starting knot. So I'm using a wool for this because we're going to fluff it up, and wool fluffs up quite nicely. So I'm using a Lana thread, which is part wool, part acrylic, so we've got some strength in there as well. I'm going to use 2 strands because this is quite thin, so I've doubled it over, and I'm going to start from the top. Now the important thing about Turkish rug stitch is you start at what will be the bottom and work your way up, and that will become apparent why in a moment. So I'm going to go down in what will be the middle of my stitch, leave a little tail, and then I'm going to come up to the left of that point, make a loop around the top. Now that's just to help me to see where I am in the stitch. Then I'm going down to the right hand side of where I started, that little tail there, and before you pull that loop through, come back up in the middle at the top of the tail where you first came out, then pull that tight, and you can see that it makes this little knotted bit of wool. So I'm going to cut that off. You can cut that to length, whatever length you want. You can do these. So that's one stitch. Now we're going to do a row of them. Now I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start on the left and work to the right. If you're left-handed, you can go the other way. So you can see what you're doing. So I'm going to go down in what would be the middle of the stitch. I'm just above that previous stitch. So if I try to stitch underneath that now, I've got to contend with all these little tails. So I'm going to work the next row on top, and the next one will be on top of that. So that's important. So down in the middle, up to the left, make a loop over the top, go down to the right. Before you pull that loop tight, come back up in the middle, then you can pull it tight, and that makes your little tail. Now we don't need to cut it off each time, we can do our cuts later, so I'm just going to carry on now. So down in the middle of what will be the next stitch, up to the left, which is the end of the previous stitch, make the loop down to the right, back up in the middle. Now you can't go back and forth with this stitch, you have to go from left to right. So I'm going to cut this one off now. Ready to start again on the left. I've got a loop there, so I'm just going to put the scissors in the loop, pull to the top and snip. It can be a little bit complicated to get the hang of this stitch, so I'll just do one more row of that. So think of them as individual stitches. So that's the middle, down in the middle, up to the left. Make your loop down to the right, back up in the middle, before you pull that loop tight. So when you do, it catches it down, and then I'm holding that thread down, ready for my next stitch. You shouldn't ever have any threads up here because that will confuse it, so have all your threads pointing down towards you. So that will be the middle of the next stitch, and I'm making that loop roughly the right length because I'm going to cut them all. Up to the left, down to the right, leap that loop back up in the middle before you pull the loop tight. You can get one more in there, so go right to the edge of your shape if you're filling in. Again, another stitch, because it's made of individual stitches, you can just use the individual ones. If you wanted to add some tufts of grass to something like that, individual ones would be great. I'm going to fill this whole shape in, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like at the end, because we're going to make it fluffy. So I'm just going to keep working my rows across from left to right, thinking of individual stitches, middle, left, right, back up in the middle, carry on. So I'll fill in the whole shape, and then I'll come back and I'll show you what to do at the end. Okay, so I've done most of the heart. You can't see that it's a heart anymore, but that's okay. I'll show you how we get the heart shape back in a minute. So I've just worked all the way to the top, exactly the same. So you'll see that this has got a pile on it, so it all goes in one direction. So you might want the pile to go in a different direction. So you'd have to put your stitches another way. So it needs a little bit of planning. Also worth mentioning that this stitch takes a lot of thread. So it can be hard to work out how much thread you will need, and if you're on a budget, it's also something to consider because it does use a lot of thread. I just need a bit more just for that last part. This is a great stitch for lots of different kinds of texture. So if you're a needle pointer and you're making your Christmas stockings for my friends across the pond, this is a must stitch for Santa Claus's beard. So well worth getting to learn this one. And if you use different kinds of threads in it, if you do it in a stranded cotton, it'll stick up and be wiry and the wool goes nice and fluffy. So experiment with some different threads to get different effects. A really, really versatile one. So one more stitch in the top. I'm going to cut that off. Make sure you cut all your loops. I tend to cut mine as I go, just so I know there aren't any hidden, although there is one there. Right, now we just need to get that into some sort of order, so I'm going to snip, I'm going to give it a haircut. Now, you can choose how long you go, and the great thing about this is if you do cut it too short, they're individual stitches you can put, with a little bit of fiddling, you can put some back in. So I'm just going to brush it up the wrong way, make it all stand up. Now, you might want it that textured. Quite sure that would be a bit too much, so I'm going to just trim that straight across. Now if you're a bit unsure about this, just take your time. I've done this stitch a lot, so I'm going to be quite brutal with it. It does make a mess as well, so bear that in mind. So I'm just going to snip it right down till I've got something that's resembling a heart. It's getting there, but it's still a bit too long, so I'll just keep going with that. Making it stand up and then snipping it flat across the top so they're all the same length. But you can shape this as well. So to get our heart shape, I'm going to angle my scissors now and I'm going to cut around the sides, short back and sides. If you angle them, you can get a little bit of shape on it. So we want to take a little bit more time than I'm taking. I just want to show you the principles and take time to shape this. But you can see what a mess it makes, so don't worry about that. Just get rid of the worst and we'll get the tape on it. And you can see this heart shape starting to come now, so I'll just keep fiddling with that. Now I would normally turn this around as I go, but because it's on the frame for the camera, I'm going to have to do some cutting acrobatics. So keep fiddling, getting shorter and shorter each time until I've got the shape that I'm happy with. Okay, I think I'm about there. Looks so funny. Little fairy heart. You can keep tweaking for a long time, but I think I'm going to leave it there. Now you can see all of this mess. It gets all over everything. So just get the worst off with your fingers, and then use a little bit of sticky tape. And just lift the rest off, so just do a little bit of a clean up around it. So really fun stitch this. Lovely little fairy heart. I really love this stitch, so definitely take the time to get to learn this one, because this one is a lot of fun. So I've got another kind of knot for you now. So this one is a bullion knot. So this is bigger than a French knot. We can make longer knots with this one. A little bit more complicated, but I'll show you the processes. So up where you want your knot to start, and you can make this as long as you want to. You can technically make it as long as a needle, but I wouldn't recommend that. So down where you want the end of the knot to be. So my knot's going to be that long. And I've got a loop now, so don't pull that loop through because that's quite important. And we're going to bring the needle back up where I first came out of the fabric in the same hole, or near as you can. Now don't pull the needle all the way through, because we're going to wrap the needle with the thread that's near the needle. So the one that shares the same hole, not this one over here. So we're going to wrap it with this one. So it doesn't matter which way around you wrap it. And I'm going to wrap it enough time so that when I lie the needle down, it meets that other thread. So that was about 4 or 5, actually count. I'm just going to support that with my thumb and my finger now. And I'm going to wiggle this needle so it comes through. And I'm going to just pull this all the way up. Now don't worry, it looks a mess at the minute. It's fine. This is how it's supposed to look at this stage. Don't panic and think I've done something wrong. So I've got this triangular shape. So I'm going to put the needle in the triangle. And I'm just going to put the thread ahead of myself, and I'm pulling on this thread here. I'm just going to pull underneath and pull those wraps down. Now you can put your finger on it and pull that to tighten it. Now this looks a little bit messy still, so keep going. Usually the problem people have with bullion knots is they stop too soon. So you can actually fiddle with these until you've got them how you want them looking. So to get rid of these sort of lumps and bumps in it, I'm going to put the needle back into the triangle. I'm just going to rub it back and forth. And that will just even out the coils. It will loosen it as well, so you'll need to retighten it. So I'm just pulling on this one against that. And just keep going till you're happy that that's nice and smooth and tight. When you're finished and you're happy with that, you just need to finish it off by taking the needle through the end of the stitch. So I've got one bullion knot, so I'll do another one. I'll do it over here. So you can do them in different directions. So that will be my start, that will be my finish. Don't pull that loop through because we need that. Needle comes back up in that starting point. Wrap the thread that's next to the needle around it. until it reaches that other thread. Just hold that between your thumb and your finger, not too tightly because otherwise you won't get this thread through, just guiding it through. Pull all the way to the top till you've got this triangle. Needle goes in the triangle and you can just tighten it up. So needle underneath on those coils, just even the coils out, pull on this thread here. Keep tensioning it, keep pulling it until you're happy with it. Needle goes down at the end. Now, those are single bullion knots, so all sorts of uses for those. You can add some texture, you can create little creatures with them, you can try different threads, will give you a different effect as well. But I want to show you one other thing that you can do with these, which is quite exciting, I think. So we can actually go over the top and we can pile them on top of each other. So if you want a really nice bit of texture, then this is great. So exactly the same as before. Now, what I'm going to do now, so that's enough wraps to meet that other thread, but I'm going to put some more on to allow me to get over the top of that previous one. So I'm going to put another 3 wraps on it. Now exactly the same, just support the needle there, pull the needle through those coils, just keep wiggling them. If they feel a bit stiff, you're either holding that too tight or you just need to pull a bit harder. So pull it all the way up, got your triangle going in that direction, so needle goes underneath. I can pull my coils down, so just keep tightening it, pull on this thread and push those ones down. Do it with your finger if you need to. And because we put extra coils on it, what it does now is it sticks up, so it's going over the top of those and it's making a little looped bullion. So you can get some really good texture with this and just pile them on top of each other. To finish, I'm going to go back through the same hole. Let's just do another one right over the top here. So I'm coming back towards myself now. It gets a bit harder when your thread gets a bit shorter. So I've got to put quite a few loops on this now to get over there. A couple more. Ooh, sneak another one on there. The more coils you put on, the harder it is to pull the needle through. So just keep pulling on that till it comes through. It will come eventually. There it is. Always just pull it to the top, like down the direction you're going, needle inside that triangle, pull the loops down. So pull on this one, push with your finger, and that one's going right over the top. You can really see this texture building up now. That's actually quite high, but a lot of fun to do that. So I'm just going to take that through to the back and I'll work a few more and we'll see what that looks like at the end. So I've done a little group of them here and I've piled some on top of each other and I've made some little short ones and done some on their own. So I'm just going to do one more to finish off this shape. I'm not going to fill it in completely because you can do some nice effects if you leave some empty spaces as well. So let's wrap for the last time. Just tension that up. Needle underneath to even the coils out. Just keep going with these until you're happy with them. Just keep fiddling with them, they will come right. Don't stop too soon. So a little short one there. Down at the end to finish that off. So a really fun stitch. You can get really quite high if you pile all these on top of each other. And try some different threads and some different lengths and just have some real fun with this because it's a great stitch. So the last one we're going to do is not really a stitch so much as actual texture, but one that you should consider because beads come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and colours and sparkly bits and dull bits and two-tone colours, so really worth considering putting in your embroidery. They will give you a lot of extra options if you want texture in your work. So I'm just going to show you how to put some beads down. I've got some here, got some different sizes. So these are a 9, these ones are slightly smaller here, and a couple of decorative ones that will I'll show you when I get to that point. So I'm going to just use this ordinary sewing cotton for this. You can use a beading thread if you want, but I think that's more for three-dimensional beading than stitching with. An ordinary sewing cotton is fine. I have just doubled it up to make it a little bit more sturdy. And really simple to put beads on. So I'm going to start with these smaller ones. This is what they look like close up. So just thread it onto the needle, slide to the bottom, and I just push the bead up to the end of the thread, and then you want to take your needle down on the other side of the bead. So you come up, through and down. Don't go back down the same hole because they'll wobble on the top. So I shall put a few of those in. Oops. So slide to the bottom. And you can just fill in the whole area with these. So again, you can use them individually on their own, like the French knots, or you can put them together. Let's try one of these larger ones in that gap there. So this is a large one. These are seed beads, but they come in different sizes. So I'll try a large one. Really great together, and will give you instant texture. And you can mix them with French knots as well if you want to, or other stitches, or decorate other stitches with them. So much you can do with beads, so do consider using them in your work for that little bit of extra texture in there. So that's all there is to it really. Needle up where you want to bead to sit. Let's put a larger one on, thread the bead on, slide to the bottom of the thread, and the needle goes down the other side of the bead. Now you can make them lie a little bit flatter if you don't want to stand up so much. I'll try with a larger one so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to thread that onto the middle, so you can see it's lying on its side now. So these ones are standing upright, this one's lying with the hole facing upwards. So if I stitch down one side of the hole, come up on the outside and stitch back down the middle, then the bead will lie in a different direction. So it gives me quite a different effect. You don't see the shine so much, and it's much flatter. So if you didn't want quite such a textured effect, you could put them on that way instead, or you can mix them up as well. So we'll put a little red one on the same way. I'll thread it on first and then go down one side, come up the other side of the bead and back down the middle. So a different way of putting the beads on. To fiddle with that a bit to get it to lie flat. There we go. So I'm just going to fill in this space, and then we're going to add a nice decorative bead at the end, just for the ultimate in texture. Okay, so final touch, and this is what using beads allows you to do. I've got a Swarovski crystal. So put that on in the gap, just because. There we go. So pretty. I mean, what's not to like about beads, really? It's quite in your face, this, because I've just filled a whole shape in with it, but if you mix it with other stitches and you mix it with your embroidery stitches, it can be really subtle. Or if you just like beads like me, it can just be really in your face. So that's it. That's 5 stitches for textures. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Do give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to click the subscribe button as well, and check out all our other videos that we've got. We've got over 200 now, so loads to go and watch. Thanks for watching.